Welcome to CJWinter How-To video series. Here at CJWinter, we provide better tools, fast delivery, great service, and value.
This is the 134 SA CJWinter pneumatic attachment. We'll be going down and showing you how to tear down the attachment, inspect and repair. Going to be focusing on the pneumatic air cylinder key components, roll pins and fulcrum pins, gear train, compensator assembly, and roll arms and brackets.
These are some of the tools you're going to need. You're going to need a 1-inch wrench. You're going to need 7/16 and 9/16 deep well sockets, retainer clip pliers, special screwdriver with a slot in it, piece of brass, 1/2 inch, square, and you got to round the ends. I'll show you how that works later. A couple wrenches, 7/16, 9/16, Allen wrenches, a pair of verniers. We use, for the fittings, we use Loctite 567, Vibrotite. And then for the O-rings and the cylinders and stuff, we use the mobile SHC synthetic mobile grease. Okay, I'm going to start tearing this down. I usually start by removing the roll arms. Pins out. Arms out to the side, just flip one over, slide the other one back out. Now you have access to get to your, to remove the wedge so you can slide the piston out. Access to the wedge pin and locking screw. Just turn your knob, the adjusting knob, to the minus side. And once you get that out of the ways, just give a little blast of air in this fitting here, and it'll shoot the piston forward. Now you can get your Allen wrench in there and take the lock screw out and remove the wedge pin.
There's an access hole through the dovetail there, Joe.
What's that?
Your access hole through the dovetail, right?
Yeah, there's an access there, and you can use the other side too. All right, so now I got that out, so now I'm gonna remove the cylinder locking bolts. Screw, cover, and there's a little O-ring that covers the thread so that keep chips and oil and stuff from getting in the thread area.
Oh, rubber washer.
Rubber washer. Yeah. Okay, at this point you can now remove the cylinder from the bracket. Set that aside for now. You can, takes a little work, just wedge that off. Inspect your inside of your cylinders, just wipe them clean, and you're going to look for any damage to the outside, because usually if it gets banged or anything or dented, it's going to show up on the inside, and then your piston will rub on there and you'll be able to see it. It'll have some kind of damage. And then if the O-rings get too worn, you could have metal to metal on the inside, and you'll see where it scores the inside of the cylinder. And just take your fingernail and run it around, and if you can feel it with the fingernail, it's probably best to get a new cylinder, because if you put a new O-ring in there, it's just going to tear it out. You'll get air leaks and stuff like that. You won't get good pressure, rolling pressure. Now we got access to this nut here, and that's what's we're going to use that to disassemble the cylinder piston shafts. Okay, now I'm going to put this part of it in the vise so I can throw a wrench on there and disconnect the piston shafts. So what I do is I'll just grab on the flats on the ears here, just stand that up in the vise. Take your 1-inch wrench, put it on there like so, give it a good push, loosen that up. And then, so what happened here was the nut loosened from the back shaft. So now these two are still locked together. Okay, so take your brass 1/2-inch square piece of brass, get around the corners off so it'll fit in here. Drop that in there. Take a 1/2-inch wrench, throw it on there, get your leverage, and you should be able to break that free. Sometimes it's not as easy as that, but just throw a wrench on there. You need to get a little more leverage. You can throw a little extender on there to give you more leverage to pop that free if you need to. Sometimes they're a little tighter than others. Then you got your two piston shafts apart. So now you can inspect the cylinder shafts. Again, you just want to look the OD over and make sure there's no galling or anything like that, because if you do have that, you're going to want to replace it so you don't get blow by, because this shaft is going in and out of this brass bushing, and there's an O-ring in there, and if that gets worn out, then you're going to get metal to metal contact. So you're going to want to check the bushing here too. If that's getting out around, you can pop that out and put a new one in.
I guess press fit it into the bracket.
Yep. And now you can check your OD of your piston. Make sure you don't have any galling or anything like that on the OD. Check your O-ring. We're going to replace the O-ring anyway. If you take it apart, you might as well replace the O-rings. Now we're going to take this one out. You get the baffle plate that goes between the two cylinders, and this cylinder shaft is going to be going in and out of that hole where there's also an O-ring. So if that gets worn, you're going to get metal to metal between these two surfaces. So if this is getting worn, this is probably worn. So just check the ID and the OD of the piston shaft. Check your piston OD. Same thing, look for flat spots or galling. And then your last cylinder, check that ID. Make sure there's nothing going on in there. Make sure it's nice and clean and smooth. If you have any galling inside, again, just replace it, because it's best to replace. Check the OD again for bangs, nicks. You'll see them on the inside. Cause you nothing but headaches. So if you have any of that stuff, replace them. Okay, now I'm going to remove the adjusting screw, and the way to do that is remove this locking nut. Take your screwdriver, hold that adjusting screw from turning, unscrew the knob, and then you can remove your adjusting screw. And then just, the way this works is it just breaks the face seal here. You can see there's an O-ring in there. So this is not really moving a whole lot. How it works is you set your pitch by adjusting your knob, which moves this adjusting nut up and down the shaft here. Now when it cycles, this nut's going to make contact to the bottom of the adjusting nut and just pulls that seal out enough to let air pass, sends the signal through your black line through this valve here, and changes the direction of the four-way. So that doesn't really get a whole lot of movement. So you can inspect it just to make sure there's nothing going on there. Like if you have a heavy crash or jam something up, or if this knob gets hit, you could bend the screw, and then you'll see wear on the ID here. And then if that happens, just replace your end plate. The other thing to look for is any kind of damage to the bottom of the adjusting nut from the attachment making contact. If you're rolling some pretty nasty material or whatever, it may take a little extra force to get it to roll, and you might see a little bit of mushrooming on the bottom there. You can, if it's not too bad, you can just take a file and smooth it back off again. But if it's really smushed out where you can't put the adjusting nut into this broach square hole, if you have any kind of interference there, you're better off replacing the nut. And in order to do that, you're going to notice the locking nut, or the stop nut, has a spring pin and a 16th spring pin. So before you take any of this apart, this dimension here is critical. If you have to replace a screw, you're going to have to re-drill a hole. So the best thing to do is to just take a measurement from the flange to the bottom of that stop nut. And that dimension, it should be right around 1 inch, 635. So you want to make sure that that gets put back in the same place, because that's going to control your length of stroke and whatnot. And you got to have that there so that you got to have that spring pin in there, so this adjusting stop nut doesn't come off, and then you'll be adjusting away and your adjusting nut will come off, and you'll have all kinds of issues. Okay, when you drill this, if you have to drill a new hole here, set your dimension. Just use your adjusting nut to hold that locking nut in place while you drill it. Just bring it up and lock the two together so that it stays nice and tight while you drill a 16th hole for the spring pin. So now the quick exhaust is used to help cycle the attachment faster, gets rid of the air quicker. And we put a cone muffler on there. Some of the older ones have flats, and we got away from that because they would get plugged up and it would affect your cycle time, because you can basically put your thumb over that and change the cycle you could almost stop it by not letting the air out of there. So we went to the cone, so it gives it a little more, you get a lot more work out of it. Inside here is a bladder that sometimes you get chips or whatever in there, and it will, your exhaust won't work right. We do resell replacements for those, or you can just buy the whole new quick exhaust. And the other crucial part of the cycling of the attachment is this valve here, this pilot valve. That's where your black line hooks up, and that black line is your signal line to the four-way to tell it to change direction. If this goes bad or the black line gets kinked, it'll affect your cycle. Either it won't return, or it won't return at the right time. You might be still on the part when the machine wants to index. So you want to make sure that this valve is accurate. So if you start having cycle problems, I would change this out and just to troubleshoot, trying to break down what the cause of the problem is. If you have another attachment, you can grab one from that attachment that you know is working and throw it on here and see if it affects your attachment's cycle, and maybe the problem will go away. And that's a cheap, easy fix. And that's just 7/16. That's all that's about. Okay, now I'm going to inspect the bracket, remove the compensator, inspect all the components to that. What to look for on the bracket is to make sure the dovetail, especially if you're using it, doesn't matter what position you're using it, because it gets used in fourth and third. So just make sure your dovetail is in good shape, because that's your locking component to put it on the attachment for it to work. Check your holes for your fulcrum. Make sure that they're not getting out of shape, oblong, damaged. Look for any kind of cracks in this area here. And when we take the center guard off, and that just gets held in with a screw, and there's a little flat here that goes into a cut on the inside of the arm. Check your gears, make sure you don't have any missing teeth or damaged teeth. If that's the case, get new gears. And check the inside, make sure there's no damage here, any kind of cracks or anything. Make sure your gear train still turns good in the bushing. Check for up and down slop and side to side. If you have any of that, you're going to want a new bushing. Now we're going to take the retaining clip off. Some kind of side. Little locking screw here. When you remove this, there are two springs in there, so just cup your hand around to make sure the springs don't go flying when you pull the adjusting collar off. Check your wedge, make sure that that's still in good shape. Just take a little Allen wrench. These springs don't come flying out at you. Just pop them out. Make sure that they're still straight, because over time they'll get compressed or damaged, and you'll see a big gap here in between them when they're in the cup. If that's the case, you're going to want to replace the springs, because you want to make sure you have good spring action on a compensator for it to work correctly. Now to take the spring retainer off. It's just a little guy, so make sure you don't lose that. And behind that is a, just loosen that up. And that dog point screw that's in here is going to locate into that detent that you see there. It's very important that dog point screw gets into that groove right there so that you don't get any, otherwise this spring retainer will spin on the external gear and you won't get good compensation and you'll ruin the gear. So, and then the other thing to look for is to make sure your gears go in and out. You can take them apart freely. If one of these is jammed up, you're gonna want to get new gears because these have to spin independent of each other. So if there's any kind of damage where these don't turn, you're going to want to get new gears. And then again, look at your bushing to make sure there's no damage in there. If that's damaged, you're definitely going to want to get a new one of those. Now we're going to disassemble and inspect the roll arms. Things you're going to look for is any kind of wear on these faces on either side. If the bracket somehow gets damaged, could be a heavy crash or something, and this gap here will get compromised. You'll see wear on the bracket and also on the arm. If that's the case, you're going to want probably a new bracket. And if these are real bad, you're going to want new arms because it's very important that they move freely and no hang-ups because you want the arms to close and open without any issues when thread rolling. So we're going to look at those. We're going to look at the fulcrum hole, make sure there's no damage in there. You can check your roll pins here because this is where you're going to get wear on the roll pin. Thread rolls sometimes get heated up if you're rolling certain materials or if you're running a high RPM. You could get some heat issue and galling, and if that happens, you're going to want to get new pins because you don't want to put a new set of rolls in there and not get the life out of them that you need to. So you can look at that while it's right here. Just look for cracks around this area or any elongation of the holes where the pins go in on both sides. And then we're going to take the roll gear guard off. And then we're going to take the roll pins out. You just loosen up these two locking screws here. Your taper adjustment screws are tapered. So the pin has a flat on it that's going to slide over this taper adjustment screw. I'll show you that here in a second. Just push your pin out. Take your gear off. Check your gear for any kind of damaged teeth. Check your tanks. Make sure they're still in good shape because that's what drives your thread roll. So you want to make sure they're in good shape. You can see here a screw that I was talking about, the adjusting screw. It has a flat on it. Threaded on one side, flat on the other. And that's where the flat on the roll pin slides across. And then your locking screw comes down into that groove there. So inspect the other side, make sure it's still in good shape. Any damage, just you're better off replacing, because you don't want to put new rolls in and compromise the life of the roll. Now you can take the idler gear guard off. That'll give you access to your idler gear. Check the idler gear for damage on the teeth and the ID. And these roll arms are, you can only put the idler gear in one way, where other thread rolling attachments, you have to make sure you set the idler gear in the right position. This one you can't put it in wrong. It only goes in one way. There's a little notch here that prevents you from putting this in wrong. So these will only go in one way, because they have to be opposed from each other, as you see. Because when you put it in the attachment, in the bracket, you have your compensator gears in there. The idler gear makes contact to your compensator gear, and that's what keeps your rolls and everything in time, and keeps the rolls moving. So if you had these, if these weren't opposed and you were on just one gear, nothing's going to turn. They're going to fight each other. So just keep that in mind. Now we're going to take the wedge roller pin out. The wedge roller. Inspect your pin. Make sure it's not worn out over time. And you get grooves on there from all the action from the wedge roller. Inspect the spring. Make sure that it is not stretched out. If it's overextended, if any of these these rings here are bent out, you're better off getting a new one, because you won't get good support from your arm. This spring keeps your arms against the wedge. So if that's stretched out or compromised in any way, you'll get roll movement when the attachment's moving in on the part. So you want to make sure that the spring is in good shape. Now we're going to start the reassembly process. I usually start with the end plate. Just clean everything up. And then if you are going to replace the O-rings, we have a kit. It's a 134-801. If you order that kit, it will give you every O-ring that you need for this attachment. Clean everything out. Make sure your O-rings are good. Put a little bit of grease on the outside of the O-ring. Take your adjusting screw. Throw that in there. Adjusting it up. Tighten it down. Screwdriver. Give it a good twist. Put your locking nut on there. Hold the knob. Make sure that's tight. If that comes loose, you could get false adjustments on your pitch adjustment. You could be turning this knob, if this is loose, and it's turning on the screw and not turning the actual adjusting screw. You think you're making an adjustment, but you're really not. So just make sure that everything's locked together to that adjusting screw so it works properly for you. So next thing I'm going to do is take the rear cylinder shaft. We're going to put an O-ring on that groove right here. Just make sure everything's cleaned up. A little bit of grease under there. Just set it on in the groove, over the threads, down to the lower groove. And you want to make sure it's up against that shaft there. Now you're going to take one of your pistons, make sure everything's clean on the ID, your groove, your O-ring groove, make sure that's all cleaned out. You can just slip that on there over that diameter. Give it a little press down, make sure you're over the O-ring. You want a good seal there, make sure the O-ring didn't squirt out. Doesn't matter which way, either way this piston can go on there. You just got to make sure you're snapped in over the O-ring. Now you can take one of your bigger O-rings, grease it up, slip it over that, put it in the groove. Take a little grease, put on your adjusting nut, because the adjusting nut again is going to be sliding in and out of there, so just put a little bit of lube on there to help its life. Set that on there. Start the nut, the locking nut. Just bring it up hand tight for now. Put a little bit of grease around your cylinder shaft. You got to make sure that the cylinder with the elbow mufflers goes on first. It's very important for the operation of the attachment.
The mufflers allow the dead air in front of the rear cylinder to escape during the cycle and improve the overall performance.
Just put a thin coat of grease on the inside of the cylinder. Cylinder walls, I'll show you on this one. You don't want to goop it in there, but you want to make sure that the cylinder wall is coated. See there. Just coat it. You don't want to use oil in the CJWinter attachments. Over time, the oil could build up inside and act as a hydraulic stop, and it also may compromise your O-ring life. So we suggest using only grease and no oil. And also, speaking of hydraulic stopping, if you have, in the summer, usually this happens, you get condensation in your air system. What happens is it's going to end up coming in here in the cylinder, and it'll act like a hydraulic stop. You'll have all kinds of problems where you're not achieving your pitch when you're thread rolling, making all kinds of adjustments and stuff like that. You might find that you got condensation in or water or oil in your cylinders, and you can just crack those 4 locking bolts, because usually it goes into the front, and drain those out, and you'll find that once that water or oil is out of there, your operation will come back and you'll be able to make your adjustments and stuff. But you don't want any kind of fluid in there.
We also have a recommended airline layout that we can provide that shows how to run your airlines in your shop to try to minimize some of that moisture collecting due to moisture in your system.
So next we're going to put on the baffle plate. You're going to notice there's 2 cutouts. Those 2 cutouts are going to go over the elbow extensions inside where it threads in. Very important to make sure that those are over the top of those. You don't want it this way. opposite there, because you won't get a seal here, and you'll have all kinds of air leaks and damage the baffle plate. So just make sure you get that in the right position. There's an O-ring on the inside, one on the outside. Line those up. Slide that on. You check to make sure you're in the groove. Your cutouts. Move on to the back. Front. Again, your little O-ring. It's going to go in that groove right there. Just bring it down over the thread. Into there. Take your piston. Clean that up. Slide it over the top. Again, it doesn't matter. Either side can go on. Just make sure that's down and got a good seal there. Then you can take it in. Just screw this together hand tight. It's going to thread into the rear shaft. Bring it down hand tight for right now. You can throw your other O-ring on there. Snap that in there. Okay, so now we're going to lock your cylinder shafts together, and the nut on the back is going to lock everything together. Again, we're just going to clamp on the ears of the front cylinder shaft. Put it in place, clamp it down. Take your 1-inch wrench and tighten that up. And that locks everything up. Take that out of the vise. Okay, now we're just going to make sure that the rear cylinder is over the O-ring and up against the end plate. Just press that down a little bit. Get it over the O-ring. You just want to make sure it's all sealed up and O-ring's not squirted out anywhere. Press your baffle plate down. Put a little bit of grease on the OD here.
And you're lining those exhaust muffler to the one shot.
To the one shot port, yeah.
It's the signal port.
Slide that on there. We're going to make sure our plungers are in the right position. I'm just going to take one out here and show you what's involved with that.
So it's a 3-piece assembly.
Yep, 3-piece assembly. Spring, you got a spring, plunger, and the locking screw. Just a hollowed out set screw looking thing with a slot in it, and that's what your grooved screwdriver is for, so that you can go over the plunger into those slots and make your adjustments that you need. So when you're reassembling the plunger, you have to replace those. They get worn out over time because your wedge rides on it. That's what keeps your wedge straight. So if you get any kind of wear from the wedge moving back and forth during rolling, it could wear out the tops of the pins. So you just drop your spring in, put your plunger through the screw there, drop that in. Before you do that, I always put a little bit of Vibertite on the OD, just so it doesn't back out on you. Don't need a lot, just enough to put some of the thread there. Put that in there. Take your screwdriver, put the slot in it, thread it in, take a reading. Make sure you're at 360. Check the other side. There's two of them in here. And make sure you're even. You want these to be set at the same depth. And so that keeps your wedge even and allows you to make a wedge change without having to compress the springs to get the pin through. So when you put any one of the wedges that you put in here are going to sit on top of those springs and allow the wedge pin to slide in there without any kind of problems. It's going to go in there nice and smooth. And when you need to make a wedge change, you can just push these pins in and out, change your wedge, throw the next one in, and away you go. Okay, so we're going to put the last two O-rings on the bracket. The smaller one goes in the bushing on the inside. A little grease on that. Slip that in the groove. This one's going to go on the outside. You're going to take your cylinder assembly, line up this is where your other big line's going to come out for the quick exhaust. So you line that up with your front fitting, slide that in there like that. Make sure everything's tight. Everything should be compressed from here. This O-ring here's fitting should be tight, and you want to be up against the bracket with the cylinder wall here. Always wipe off my fingerprints. Now you can start putting the locking screws in. Start with the washer, cover tube, lock them until you get them all in there. See, I put start out putting it on the O-ring or the rubber washer down here, and just rock it in. Helps keep that washer from moving around because you want to make sure the bolt goes through that washer. So now just hand tighten these down. Now we're going to do a crisscross tightening method. Now make sure these are good and tight. That's that. Now you're all locked together. Okay, now we're going to put the air fittings in. We have 3 air fittings to go on. This will be the front. It's going to go into the bracket, and this fitting here, the larger one, is going to go into the quick exhaust. These are very important because they are different ends. So the fatter, wider fitting end is going to go to the back always. If you mix these up, when you hook up your air control, the lines are going to be backwards and it won't cycle scratching your head wondering what the heck's going on. And it could be as easy as these fittings are in the wrong place and therefore your lines are crossed. So always make sure that your airline fittings are in the right place. So take a little bit of our thread sealant, throw it on the elbow here. You'll notice there's two elbows. One's got the quarter, one has the pipe thread. The other elbow is for the pilot. You turn that elbow so that it angles off the side, and that puts your line out of the way in third position and fourth. It keeps everything nice and neat with the lines. It helps get the quick disconnect on and off too. You don't want it over the cylinder because you'll end up hitting the cylinder and won't be able to get your hand in there. So we always point it off the side, gives you plenty of access to get those quick disconnects on and off. Now we're going to go to the back, put the quick exhaust on. I usually just thread this one in the bottom here. Quick disconnect. 9/16 wrench. Give it a good twist. Straighten it up so it's pointing out the back. Keeping this in line. Lock that down. Turn this over. Put your smaller elbow in there for the pilot. Want to make sure you don't get any sealant on the inside of the hole so it doesn't compromise your pilot valve from working. And just bring it around so it's pointing out the back. Make sure you can't turn it by hand. Just bring that down so it bottoms out. You don't want to over tighten it so you snap it. So just make sure it's tight, but don't over tighten it. You don't want to break that thread off. So just and that's there. And that's okay. Now I'm going to put the wedge back in the front cylinder shaft, and I'm going to do just like I did when I took it out. Turn the knob to the minus. Shoot a blast of air in this fitting here. Just going to fire that. It's going to push the piston up there. Take your wedge. As you can see, it's in the wrong position at this point. So if you just put your wedge in there, you can turn it.
So you're turning the cylinder shaft
Yes.
90 degrees, rotating it 90 degrees.
Yeah, 'cause
Outline the wedge.
You want your wedge lined up with your thread roll arm openings. Once you get that in the right position, you can put the pin in. Slide the pin in there. Put your locking screw back in. Tighten that down.
there's a flat in that pin that you lock in the locking screw into as well.
And then I just take another blast of air in this line, and it's going to push the wedge back. See, now the wedge is back home. And then I always turn the knob back in a plus. I don't know, give it like 10 turns or so. Just make sure you're away from the end of the stroke, so you don't jam it up. Okay, so now we're going to move on to putting in our compensator. We're going to start with the gears. Clean them up. Make sure they slide in and out of each other nice and easy. Everything spins free. Slide them into the bushing there. Take your spring retainer, slide that over the external gear, lining up make sure your detent's up, pointing up. Kind of line your screw up there because you want to make sure the dog point falls into that detent. I'm going to bring the screw down. You can slide that up and down. Make sure you're in the you got that dog point in the detent. Just bring it down. So it tightens up a little bit. You don't want to go over tight because if you over tighten that, you're going to put pressure on the internal gear and it will not slide in and out. What happens is you're going to lock the two gears together. If that happens, you won't get any compensation. These have to spin independent of each other. So once you get it set there, and I put your backing screw in there, just give it a little tighten. Again, check to make sure your internal gear still moves freely. Now we're going to put the compensator springs in the retainer. Slide one in there. Bring your other one around, and be careful doing this so the springs do tend to fly out. So just keep that in mind. You're going to want safety glasses on and kind of keep your hand cupped around there so they don't come flying out. Who knows where they go? You'll lose them in the shop somewhere. So now what we need to do, I always leave one of the springs, the last one I put in, it's sticking out higher than the first spring that I put in. And the reason for that is when I slide this together, that wedge, I'm going to bank up against the spring that's sticking out and give it a little twist and then push down to be sure that the wedge is going between the two springs, therefore giving you the right compensation mechanics. If you don't get that between them, you may not get you're not going to get the right spring action for the compensation. So just bring it down, hold the gears, give this adjusting knob a little, or adjusting collar a little turn, and then push down, and then just check by holding the gear to make sure you get spring action both ways, and you'll know that you're in between the two springs. It may take a couple times to get that down, but so then we're going to lock the adjusting collar, screw here, tighten that up, put the retainer back on, retaining clip. Make sure it's down in the groove good. Make sure everything spins. Put the center gear guard on. Again, there's a flat up here, it slides on there. There's a little groove in the face here where the little tab goes in, just underneath the gears. There. Set this aside. Okay, now we're going to go on to the roll arm assembly. And I'll start out with putting in the the roll arm spring, wedge rollers, and the two wedge roller pins. Just start it in the hole there, put your spring in. You can see where the loop ends. That should face down. There's a flat on the pin for the screw to lock down on. Lock that down. Slide your loop through into the groove on the arm. Start your pin in. Wedge roller. Tighten those down. Now we'll put the idler gears in. Again, they only go in one way. Put those in. Idler guards. Flip the arms over. Put in the carbide roll pin, high polished carbide. It helps with roll life. You want to make sure it's high polished carbide roll pin. Okay, start from this side. Make sure the big flat is going to line up with the adjusting screw. Put your roll gear washer on. Slide that in. Slide that into place. Locking screw on there. Tighten that down. Do the same on the other side. Just got to make sure that that flat is position to allow that pin to go in there.
You want to make sure the pin is flush on the one side, opposite the side you're putting the set screws. The portion of the pin that sticks out is used for some gauging on the attachment.
Put your roll gear guards on. Now, last step is to get the arms in the attachment. Make sure your idler gears are going to turn into the compensator gear. Slide them up into the groove. I always tip it one way here. And what that does is it allows the idler gear to fall into position. Take your fulcrum pin. It'll slide right through.
There's a flat on the pin that you line to get the set screw in.
Well, make sure the pin's not sticking out on the side, so when you slide it into the mounting bracket, you don't have any interference there. Rotate it over. Locking screw in. Get that locked down. Stand it up. Make sure you have good gear train action. Just by turning this knob here, you can see everything's turning nice and smooth. Arms move in and out.
Please visit us at www.cjwinter.com for additional information.